Welcome to Salem Witch Trials Daily. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
This is Sarah Jack. We have a lot of action to cover today, Monday, May 23rd, 1692. First, Elizabeth Booth was allegedly afflicted by Mary DeRich and John, Elizabeth, and Sarah Proctor. Booth claimed that Mary DeRich came to her in the night, called her a jade, asked why she had said anything about Sarah Proctor, and told her it was, well, she did not come to Salem Village that day.
And Nathaniel Ingersoll and Thomas Raymond filed a complaint against Benjamin Proctor, Sarah Pease, and Mary DeRich, who was the sister of Elizabeth Proctor. And Mary's son, John DeRich, testified in the Salem Witch Trials against George Jacobs Sr., Margaret Jacobs, and Giles Corey.
The complaint alleged that the three accused had committed witchcraft against Mary Warren, Abigail Williams, Elizabeth Hubbard, and other unnamed victims in Salem Village. In response to the complaint, Magistrate Jonathan Corwin wrote warrants for Mary DeRich and Sarah Pease to be arrested, and Magistrate John Hathorne wrote a warrant that covered all three suspects. They were thorough.
Constable Joseph Neal arrested Mary DeRich, Peter Osgood arrested Sarah Pease, and John Putnam Jr. arrested Benjamin Proctor, and the suspects were brought before the magistrates in Salem.
Also today, Magistrates Hathorne and Corwin questioned 6 or 7 people in preliminary hearings known as examinations. In addition to the 3 new suspects, they held hearings for Sarah Bassett, Elizabeth Cary, the re-arrested Mary Esty, and possibly Susanna Roots. Mary Esty had previously been examined on April 22nd, and this current examination began on Saturday, May 21st, before being recessed for the Sabbath.
The records of these examinations sadly have not survived, so we're left to surmise what happened based on the testimonies that we got about what happened at the examinations, because we know in a lot of testimonies, the afflicted just talked about how they were afflicted during the examination of somebody, and that's what the people end up being indicted on, was what happened in the examinations. So we can use those to infer how those went. But we do have information on Elizabeth Cary's arrest, thanks to the account of her husband, Captain Nathaniel Cary, being published in Robert Califf's More Wonders of the Invisible World.
The Carys had heard that Elizabeth was being talked about as a witch, so they traveled from Charlestown to Salem Village in hopes of meeting the accusers and sorting things out. Nathaniel Cary spoke with Reverend John Hale from nearby Beverly, an old acquaintance, about meeting privately with Abigail Williams at the village parsonage. However, Hale could only get an agreement for Abigail to meet with the Carys in Ingersoll's tavern.
When the Carys were seated in the tavern, Abigail and other unnamed afflicted people came in and made a big show of having fits. Elizabeth Cary pointed out that she'd never even met them or heard of these people before today, so how could she have harmed them?
The magistrates were laying in wait in another chamber. They forced Elizabeth to stand tall with her arms outstretched, which was painfully difficult for Elizabeth. Her husband was not allowed to help her. Judge Hathorne said she had strength enough to torment these persons, and she should have strength enough to stand.
The magistrates had tricked the Carys into a surprise examination, and at the end, Elizabeth was arrested. Nathaniel was able to have her transferred to the jail in their hometown of Charlestown, where he could visit her, but she was put in 8-pound shackles when she got there and reportedly had violent fits in response. In a future episode, we'll cover Elizabeth Cary's escape.
Today, Samuel Abbey, Sarah Task, Mary Walcott, Abigail Williams, and Ann Putnam Jr. provided testimony against Mary Esty, John Willard, and Mary Whittredge, relaying their accounts of the events of May 20th, when Mercy Lewis had appeared to be near death in the Putnams' home.
And Susanna Sheldon made a statement against Daniel Andrew, Sarah Proctor, George Jacobs Jr., and Philip English.
Abigail Williams testified against Sarah Good, Sarah Osburn, and Tituba. And yes, Sarah Osburn is dead at this point, but she's complaining about afflictions that happened for a long time, going way back. She's just expressing how she was tormented for a long time.
And then we get testimony also from John Richards and Joseph Morgan against Dorcas Hoar.
Elizabeth Booth was deposed against Sarah Proctor, Mary DeRich, Elizabeth Proctor, and John Proctor.
And David Furneaux, Jonathan Walcott Jr., Mary Walcott, Thomas Putnam, and John Putnam Jr. testified against Sarah Proctor.
Andrew Elliott made a statement against Susanna Roots.
Thomas Gage and Elias Pickworth testified against Roger Toothaker.
At the end of the day, 7 prisoners were transferred to Boston Prison, and 2 others were jailed in Salem.
And then John Hathorne wrote a census of prisoner movements to keep track of where each inmate was and when they were moved there. It had been nearly 3 months since the first 3 women were jailed for witchcraft. Now the list included the names of 51 witchcraft suspects.